they would not be able to go on, would God not be there. So I would say that when we explain the law of karma, in other words, to what extent, I was to some extent thinking like this, that this universe is working under the law of action and reaction, which is set in movement by Krishna, but also maintained by Krishna. That the Super Soul maintains, is not only remembering the action and knowing which direction to give, but also is, because we're not mudas, we know Prakriti Kriyamanani, that we are not the door, but is the door. So he's actually the one who's maintaining at every moment those laws. So even if we would accept that there is action and reaction, and that any reaction at a certain point is coming from the previous action, well, if Krishna is there and actually puts everything in order, isn't that our understanding? And could that not be a satisfactory answer to the clock image of the universe?
No, it's not. The reason is that you have to follow out the implications of this clockwork picture, whether you apply that to the law of karma or to Western ideas of the universe as a clockwork. The implication there is, first of all, that there is no question of the karmic actions and reactions being the fault or the responsibility of individuals. Because if everything is developing automatically by action and reaction, how then am I to blame for my actions? Or how are you to blame for your actions? If everything is developing according to certain laws, action leads to reaction and so forth in a chain which is unbroken, then there's no question of saying that anyone is at fault. So, yet our philosophy is that we are responsible for our actions. And we have a responsibility to avoid sinful activities which would lead to bad karmic consequences. However, if everything is developing automatically by action and reaction, there's no question of avoiding such things by some act of will. If I avoid sinful activities, it's merely because that's what the actions and reactions did in my case. They caused me to avoid sinful activities. And if I indulge in sinful activities, well, that's what the actions and reactions happen to do in my case. There's no question of saying that I'm responsible or I'm not responsible. So the whole thing becomes completely impersonal. The idea of free will and responsibility is totally eliminated. And in fact, that's one consequence of this scientific view. If you follow it out logically, you find that it totally eliminates the idea of free will and responsibility. So what is the actual philosophy of Krishna consciousness? The actual philosophy is that we do have freedom of choice. So the desire of the soul, and the soul is transcendental, so the desire of the soul determines ultimately whether you engage in a certain course of activity or not. In the case of a devotee who decides to break the regulative principles, or else he doesn't break the regulative principles, why is it that that happens? Let's say he breaks them. Why does he break them? If that's simply a result of action and reaction going back into the past, then how can you say he's in any way responsible? Or suppose he doesn't break them. How can you say that that's any credit to him? If it's just a matter of action and reaction, so on, going back. So actually, that's not our philosophy. Our philosophy is that it's due to the actual will of that spirit soul, not even due to the thinking, feeling, and willing in the material mind. Because, of course, according to the Vedic literatures, manas, or the mind element, is something distinct from the gross physical body, and it's also distinct from the soul. It's a subtle material element. And the function of the mind is thinking, feeling, and willing. But even the mind is basically a mechanical thing, this subtle mind. But even there, that is not the source of the actual decision of the individual to do one thing or not to do it. The source is actually the spirit soul. The spirit soul actually makes a choice. And because of the spirit soul making a certain choice, the energy of matter is diverted in one way or another. Now then you can ask, well, what about the verses that say that we are not the doer? There's so many verses like that. So the answer there is that in fact it is the supersoul who is controlling the material energy. And the supersoul is doing that in accordance with the will of the soul. So Krishna says, I don't take responsibility for your sinful activities, even though I'm the one who's actually doing it. Because Krishna is actually directing the material energy so as to carry out someone's sinful activities, if that's what they want to do. But Krishna is doing that in accordance with the actual desire within that spirit soul. That spirit soul has made a decision. All right, I'm going to do it. I want to commit these sinful activities. And then Krishna says, all right, then that's what's going to happen. And Krishna makes it happen in his expansion as supersoul. But that is in accordance with the will of the individual, which is entirely spiritual. So what you have here is a link in which something entirely transcendental and spiritual, namely the will of that soul, is translated into some course of action in the material world in which a body does one thing as opposed to some other thing it could have done. So you have this link between the transcendental non-material element and the gross physical elements. So that's not possible according to the clockwork picture, or according to the picture of karma as being simply action and reaction without any break. Of course, there are limits to our free will. Obviously, if you engage in a certain activity, you may become conditioned in a certain way. As a result of that, you lose your freedom. For example, suppose somebody begins taking heroin and becomes addicted to it. Then, to a certain extent, he loses his freedom because now he has to get heroin somehow. He's being forced. Or to take an even simpler example, suppose you go to the airport, you buy a ticket and you get on the plane. Once you're on the plane, you're going to go to the destination of that plane. You have no choice unless you try and jump out or something like that. So your freedom is then constrained. So it's not that we have absolute freedom to do anything. There are actions and reactions that do constrain us. But at the same time, there are choices that one can make. So the idea that you have strictly a system of action and reaction does not agree with the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. Yeah?
I think it's in the same line. You've explained how, as science developed from Descartes and Newton especially, the idea, well, God was more or less banished. You explained it that it wasn't necessary. You said that several times.
Yes. As
an explanation for material phenomena or events which we can observe. Huh? Now, I'm just curious about the motivation, because on one hand, this concept of Polkinghorne would provide for a way for God to exist. In other words, whatever they may have demonstrated about material events, they can't disprove, they haven't disproved the existence of God, but they prefer to interpret as though he wasn't there. Is that
well, you see, most scientists will say that as scientists, they're not even concerned with God. Very often you'll hear the statement made that, well, a scientist may have a particular religious belief, but he doesn't allow that to interfere with his scientific considerations. As a scientist, he is thinking in one way, and on the basis of some religion that he holds to, he is thinking something about God. But these two things don't impinge upon one another in any serious way. They're separate domains of thought. There's no meeting point between them. So therefore, there's no conflict between science and religion. Science deals with the way that matter behaves, according to certain physical laws and so forth. And religion, they will say, deals with values and spiritual considerations. Well, ultimately, this point of view is not coherent, because, in fact, religion deals also with matter right down to the last detail, because matter is Krishna's energy. And if you try to maintain a philosophy similar to that of this Polkinghorne, for example, and of course his ideas are not unique to him, these are very common ideas. Essentially what you do, as I was saying before, is you eliminate religion. You may have God, but you've defined God and the role of God in nature in such a way that you've eliminated religion. You see, one form of atheism is to redefine God in such a way as to contradict important features of Krishna as he actually is. You may say, well, you believe in God, but what God do you believe in? If you believe in something that is not at all adequate as far as the actual situation of Krishna and his relation with the jiva soul is concerned, then that idea of God is tantamount to really a form of atheism. For example, as an extreme case, you can take the philosophy of Spinoza. According to Spinoza, you simply identify God with nature. So, okay, God is nature. So we certainly believe in God because we believe in nature. God is all-pervading because nature is all-pervading. God is all-powerful. Well, nature is all-powerful because nature is everything that exists. So you can say many traditional things about God in the context of this philosophy, but actually this philosophy amounts to strict materialism because you're saying nothing exists but nature, and if you like, you can call it God. So that's just one example of a form of atheism that's a little bit more subtle than just saying, I don't believe in God. The Mayavadi philosophy, of course, is another example. The Mayavadi will say that, well, I believe in God, and I understand God to be the impersonal Brahman, beyond qualities and form, and so forth. I don't believe in a gross anthropomorphic, naive conception, as these followers of Bhakti Yoga do. So, once again, that's a concept of God, but it leaves out very important features of God as he actually is. So it's tantamount to atheism.
Would it be similar in some way to this karma mimamsa, or was it Mimamsa?
Karma mimamsa?
Philosophy that we read about in the Krishna book. It's more or less, because what I gather from what you're saying is that they observe that things are deterministic. They observe that events always proceed in the same way, assuming the same factors. And the same And therefore, it's more of a question of the irrelevance. So it reminds me of that, where Krishna was saying, well, anyway, even if there are demigods, even if there are transcendent controllers, they have to act in a certain way.
That's right.
They provide the results anyway. In other words, they themselves are also not really free agents.
Yeah.
Is it similar to that?
It is. The Karma Mimamsa philosophy is very similar to this deterministic philosophy of modern science. The idea there is that, well, of course, as Krishna was expounding this to Nanda Maharaj, he said that, well, even if there are demigods, they're bound to follow the rules of karma. They strictly follow those rules. So therefore, it doesn't matter whether the demigods really exist or not. The rules are all that count. So, never mind the demigods, just act properly according to the rules of karmic activity, and you'll get the desired results according to the rules, and that's all that counts. The demigods may exist or they may not. So it's a similar thing. Polkinghorne's philosophy amounts to saying that, yes, God is sustaining the laws of physics, but everything's really happening according to the laws of physics. So if you want to know what's going to happen, just look at the laws of physics. And someone else can say, well, I prefer not to say that God is sustaining the laws of physics. I would prefer to say that the laws of physics are simply the absolute basis of everything. And as far as anything that anyone could ever hope to experience or observe is concerned, that's the same thing. You can say that God is sustaining them, or you can say they're just the ultimate basis. It makes no difference.
I guess I'm not really asking a question, just formally. For instance, if you could show a different world, science fiction sometimes talks about this.
Yeah.
Some space vehicle moves through an area where the laws of nature are totally different, where reality is not the same. I mean, if you can show that kind of a situation, if you could show a situation where the laws of nature don't work in a predictable way, then you could again posit very strongly that there is God who is maintaining different situations